a clear, objective set of criteria and an externally validated scheme. And undoubtedly, that is a requirement that will help to give added impetus to this very important programme, but also to get buy-in by people who want to be part of something at that level. I was very pleased to see at least one of the exhibitors having an EU Flower Award already. That's an award that many of you can aspire to getting, and it's something that I certainly would urge you to do. I want to thank Failte Ireland and the EPA for their involvement in all of this process. But I particularly want to thank yourselves in the tourism industry and the hospitality sector, as I know that, particularly with the weakness of the American dollar and with the whole international economic situation impacted very negatively on arising from subprime lending and all the other little difficulties in that area, that you have concerns about the bottom line in your own business in relation to numbers and marketing and all of that, and that you're somewhat preoccupied in that area. And I'm very pleased that so many of you have taken part in the Green Failte and Greening Irish Tourism Awards system, because I do realise that it's very difficult to keep your eye on issues like climate change and environmental issues when there are very pressing economic considerations for everybody in the industry. And I suppose what we ultimately need to do, and it's something that's very difficult to do, is to encourage behavioural change in all members of society. And there have been instances where behavioural change has followed from, for example, from the plastic bag levy, or from the Power of One campaign, where relatively small initiatives have been embraced by the populace at large. It's very difficult in your sector because you have a transient community more than a permanent one in your premises, and it's very hard to affect change in their habits. So most times, I suppose, you can do that by making provision in your own premises. And I'm delighted that people are gradually doing that. And I want to very briefly mention the waste area. I know that by and large it's a considerable difficulty for you, and we're trying to move towards best practice in that area and setting standards that are attainable but also achieve something. And no more than in the energy area, waste prevention is by far the most effective strategy. Obviously you have to have waste recovery, you have to have recycling, and you have to make every attempt to ensure that that's done to the maximum possible extent. But certainly it's in the area of prevention that the most opportunity is available. As indeed in the energy area, I think most of us think about making alternative provision, solar heating or wind energy or whatever, when in actual fact the most immediate financial benefit and the most immediate benefit in terms of reducing emissions is in cutting down usage. And there are myriad ways that we can do that. Sometimes we can successfully encourage people to do it, but even if we can't, there are interventions that we can make in our own premises that ensure that if there are people who go out of the room and leave every light on and the television blaring and all the other things that people do, that there are automated ways to deal with that. And I know that gradually many of your businesses have been looking very carefully at those options. I've been looking at alternate lighting options. When my colleague Minister John Wormley introduced this scheme for moving on from our current forms of lighting to CFL and LED and so on, I think a lot of reasonable people were amazed at the outcry there was against the idea. But it's one of the areas where LED technology, in particular CFL technology, has advanced really dramatically in a very short time. And I think the standards available are now probably acceptable even to people like me who need very good light to read very boring reports late at night. One of the things I'm always tempted to say to people in the hotel sector, usually forget to say, is that I don't know what kind of activities the lighting system in a lot of hotel rooms are designed to facilitate, but in most instances they're very poorly designed to facilitate people like me who might get back to the room around 11 o'clock and have a report to read and that very low lighting beside the bed is not really very helpful. And generally speaking, the best lighting is probably just inside the door in the entrance to the room, which isn't the most comfortable place to position your chair if you want to read the report. That's just a suggestion that has nothing to do at all with the business of the day, but something that I notice in a huge lot of hotels, not just in Ireland, almost everywhere I go. It's maybe something to consider, a little light somewhere for the ancient guy who has to read the report and has to learn his speech for the following day or know a minimum about it. But I'm very pleased indeed to have been invited along. I do want, again on behalf of the government, to congratulate all of you for your participation, to wish you well on all the fronts for a quick economic recovery in terms of the dollar and in terms of the bank's capacity to once again play the kind of part that they used to play once upon a time, and also that the concerns that there are around travel and carbon emissions will, by technological and other advances, enable people to continue to enjoy the wonderful pristine environment of Ireland, but very importantly, and perhaps much more importantly, the quality of the service that's provided to them by the staffs in all of your establishments, because ultimately all of you will be aware that that's the quality that perhaps sets us apart. So thanks very much indeed, and I wish you well for the remainder of your project.
For monitoring environmental quality and enforcing a large amount of national and EU environmental law. The EPA employs 290 people across the country in regional inspectorates and laboratories, and have recently received an increase in both funding and staff to ensure that Ireland meets all of its obligations regarding environmental protection. Brian Meany is a senior scientific officer based at the headquarters of the Environmental Protection Agency in Johnstown Castle, County Wexford. Brian is responsible for the implementation of the National Waste Prevention Programme, on which he will expand in a moment. Brian is also responsible, amongst other things, for planning for hazardous waste, management in Ireland for generating national statistics on waste that are used for calculating national recycling and landfilling rates. Brian has spent the last 12 years with the EPA. I would now ask you to welcome Brian Meany to us.
Good morning, and thank you, Natasha, for your introduction, and thank you to Minister Killeen for his opening address to the conference. It's always good to note and welcome the support of the Minister for the idea of improving environmental performance in the hotel and hospitality sector. And as the Department of Environment, Heritage and Local Government is our sponsoring department, it's great to have ministers here to see what we do and the kind of projects we get involved in. On behalf of the EPA, as a sponsor of today's conference, I'd like to welcome you, the delegates, and it's good to see so many people here, to be honest, and pleased that so many of you are interested in finding out, if you didn't already know, because you perhaps haven't gotten the awards today, that environmental performance can save you money. The one thing I'm sure of, as of now, is that most of you probably know very little about the EPA. So I'll start by giving you a very, very brief overview of the organisation that is responsible for taking the lead in protecting many aspects of the Irish environment. Now, the EPA was set up in 1993 on foot of the Environmental Protection Agency Act of 1992, so it has a statutory brief and a statutory footing. Its brief is wide, and to be honest, it's getting wider all the time, as new environmental legislation is made in Brussels and in Dublin. And the administration of that will be having sanctioned from many new posts lately if anyone is interested in a new job in the environmental field. Amongst its key roles and responsibilities, the EPA is responsible for licensing and enforcing environmental standards with industry, including the waste industry, monitoring and reporting environmental quality, lakes, rivers, air, drinking water, and working with local authorities, both in partnership and sometimes in an enforcement role, in terms of their statutory obligations on the environment. As regards to the formal text, if you like, in the EPA's vision and mandate, is to protect the natural environment for present and future generations, taking into account the environmental, social and economic principles of sustainable development. And we do seek at every opportunity to place environmental issues at the heart of decision making, be that at the national level varying at the local level or at